Your life rarely goes beyond the image you have of yourself. Before any achievement appears in the external world, it first needs to exist internally, because the way you see yourself silently influences everything: your decisions, your posture, your relationships, your standards, and even the opportunities you believe you deserve. Many people try to change their reality only through effort, goals, and motivation, but they continue carrying the same identity inside. And when self-image remains small, life tends to repeat the same limits. On the other hand, there is a type of woman who seems to transform the environment around her without forcing anything. She enters different spaces, positions herself differently, and naturally begins attracting experiences aligned with who she believes she is. This does not happen by accident. The mind constantly works to make your reality coherent with the identity you hold internally. When your self-image changes, your choices change. And when your choices change, your life inevitably begins to change too. Creating a powerful self-image is not about arrogance. It is about building such a strong perception of yourself that the world begins responding differently to your presence. If you want to learn how to develop a self-image capable of transforming your reality, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. First principle: your reality always follows your identity. There is a reason some people seem to repeat the same patterns for years, even while trying to change their lives. They change goals, make plans, try to create new habits, but continue carrying the same internal image of themselves. And while identity does not change, reality tends to return to the same place. A few years ago, a woman shared something that made this very clear. She said she always started projects enthusiastically, but deep down, never fully believed she could build a different life. When opportunities appeared, she hesitated. When she needed to position herself, she diminished herself. And when things started going well, she unconsciously sabotaged the process. Until one day, she heard a phrase that completely changed her perspective. You do not act according to what you want. You act according to who you believe you are. That stayed in her mind for weeks. She began observing her own behavior and realized something important. Deep down, she still saw herself as insecure, limited, and incapable of sustaining major change, and that silent identity was controlling her decisions. That was when she decided to change something before trying to change reality. She began working on her self-image. She changed the way she spoke to herself, changed her posture, changed the environments she frequented, and little by little, her decisions began matching this new identity. This happens because your mind constantly seeks coherence. If you believe you are small, you tend to act small. But when you begin seeing yourself differently, your actions naturally begin to change, and reality follows. Comment: my reality follows who I decide to become. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that true transformation begins first in identity, and only afterward appears in the external world. Second principle: stop mentally repeating the old version of yourself. There is something that keeps many people trapped in the same reality, even when they want to change. They continue mentally feeding their old identity. They speak like the old version, think like the old version, and most importantly, constantly remember who they used to be. A few years ago, a woman shared that she struggled to believe in her own transformation. Even after evolving in many areas of life, she still saw herself through old experiences. If she made a mistake, she would say, "I've always been like this." If she felt insecure, she thought, "That's just my personality." It was as if her mind constantly pulled her back toward an identity that no longer made sense. Until one day, she heard something that completely changed her perspective. Every time you repeat the old story, you strengthen the old identity. That made immediate sense. She realized she spent more time remembering old failures than reinforcing the woman she was trying to become. So she decided to change something simple. Every time her mind tried pulling her toward the old version, she consciously interrupted it. Instead of repeating, "I'm insecure," she began saying, "I'm learning to trust myself more." Instead of, "I never stay consistent," she said, "I'm becoming more consistent every day." At first it felt strange, but over time, something began changing. Her mind started accepting the new narrative. Her actions began following it, and the old identity gradually lost strength. This happens because self-image is built primarily through mental repetition. What you repeatedly reinforce internally becomes stronger. People who transform their reality understand this deeply. They stop feeding old versions of themselves and consciously begin strengthening the identity they want to build. Comment: I no longer feed my old version. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that reality begins changing when you stop mentally repeating who you used to be. Third principle. Your self-image is built through the evidence you create daily. Many people believe self-esteem and self-image are built only through positive thinking. But there is something much stronger than motivational phrases. The evidence you give yourself every single day. Because in the end, your mind believes much more in what you repeatedly do than in what you merely say. A few years ago, a woman shared that she tried changing the way she saw herself, but nothing seemed to work. She repeated affirmations, watched motivational content, and tried thinking positively. Even so, deep down she still felt the same, until she realized something important. She told herself she was disciplined, but broke promises daily, said she was confident, but avoided positioning herself, said she wanted change, but maintained the same habits, and her mind was observing all of it. That was when she heard a phrase that completely changed her perspective. Your self-image is not built by what you wish to become. It is built by the proof you give yourself. That changed everything. She stopped trying to convince her mind only with words and began creating small concrete evidence. Simple things. Keeping the schedule she defined, finishing small tasks, maintaining posture even when insecure, and gradually, something started happening. Her mind began registering these actions as real proof of change. Confidence increased, and identity began strengthening naturally. This happens because the brain learns through repetition and evidence. Every time you act like the person you want to become, you create internal proof of capability, and those proofs build a much stronger self-image than any motivational speech ever could. Many women begin changing their lives the moment they transform the way they see themselves. Their posture changes, standards rise, and confidence starts appearing much more naturally. But at some point, almost all of them realize something important. There is no point building a strong identity while still carrying insecurity in one of the areas that most influence a woman's freedom: money. Because the truth is simple. When you still live worried about stability, dependent on circumstances, or fearful about your financial future, part of your energy remains trapped, and that silently influences your decisions. It influences the environments you accept, the choices you make, and even how free you feel to live according to the woman you are becoming. A powerful self-image needs structure to sustain itself, and one of the most important foundations of feminine confidence is financial security. When a woman learns how to build stability, something changes deeply inside her. Decisions stop being guided by fear, her posture changes, and the feeling of autonomy finally begins appearing for real. That is exactly why the Wealth Code was created. A guide designed to transform your relationship with money in a simple and accessible way, helping you develop a stronger financial mindset, build security over time, and live with something that completely changes the way you position yourself in the world. The freedom to choose your own path. Because when your identity, your mind, and your financial life begin moving together, your reality changes much more deeply. You stop merely imagining a bigger life and start building the structure capable of sustaining it. If you want to strengthen your autonomy and align your new identity with a solid financial foundation, the link to discover the Wealth Code is pinned in the first comment. Fourth principle. Your environment silently reinforces your self-image. There is one detail many people ignore when trying to change their lives. The environment they live in constantly reinforces the identity they hold. The places you go, the people around you, even the space where you live. All of these things send silent messages to your mind about who you believe you are. A few years ago, a woman realized this very clearly. She said she wanted to become more disciplined, elegant, and confident. But when she observed her routine, something did not match. Her environment reflected disorder, clothes scattered everywhere, a routine without structure, negative people around her, conversations that added nothing to her life. And without realizing it, all of that reinforced daily an identity misaligned with the life she wanted to build, until she heard a simple phrase: your environment always confirms what your mind believes about you. That changed the way she saw things. She began changing small details. She organized her space better, started taking better care of her appearance, began consuming different content, and reduced contact with environments that drained her energy. At first, these changes seemed superficial, but something started happening. Her posture changed, discipline became more natural, and slowly she began seeing herself differently. This happens because the brain constantly absorbs signals from the environment. When your environment communicates chaos, neglect, or limitation, your mind tends to reinforce that identity. But when the environment begins reflecting organization, intention, and growth, something internal adjusts too. People who transform their reality understand this deeply. They do not wait to feel different before changing the environment. They change the environment and allow the mind to follow afterward. Comment: my environment strengthens my new identity. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that self-image is also built through the silent messages you allow around you every day. Fifth principle: the way you speak to yourself shapes your reality. There is a voice that follows you all the time. Even in silence, it is there, commenting on your decisions, interpreting situations, and defining how you feel about yourself. And few things influence your self-image as much as this internal conversation. A few years ago, a woman realized something curious about her own mind. Every time something went wrong, the reaction was automatic. I ruin everything. I never manage to stay consistent. Maybe I'm not good enough. These phrases seemed like passing thoughts. But over time, she began noticing the silent impact they created. The more she repeated those things internally, the more her posture changed, the more insecure she became, and the more her reality seemed to confirm exactly what she said about herself. Until one day she heard a phrase that completely changed her perception. Your mind is always listening to the way you speak to yourself. That stayed in her head for days. She realized she spent more time reinforcing flaws than recognizing progress. And without realizing it, she was training her own mind to see her as someone limited. That was when she decided to change something simple. She began consciously observing the words she used with herself, not to pretend perfection, but to stop feeding internal destruction. Instead of saying, "I'm terrible at this," she started saying, "I'm learning." Instead of, "I never succeed," she said, "I'm becoming more consistent." At first, it seemed small, but something started changing. Her posture changed, confidence increased, and her actions began following this new internal narrative. This happens because your mind transforms repetition into identity. What you constantly say about yourself stops being just a thought and begins becoming reality. Comment: I speak to myself like someone valuable. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that a powerful self-image begins with the way you choose to speak to yourself every single day. Sixth principle: stop acting like someone still living in the past. There is a silent behavior that prevents many people from changing their reality. They continue making decisions based on who they used to be, not who they are becoming. The past becomes identity. A woman who was once rejected begins acting like someone who will always be left behind. A person who failed a few times starts behaving like someone incapable of succeeding. And without realizing it, the past continues controlling the present. A few years ago, a woman shared that she struggled to grow professionally. Every time a bigger opportunity appeared, she pulled back. At first, she called it caution, but when she looked more closely, she realized something deeper. She was still making decisions based on the old version of herself, the one who once heard she was not capable, not good enough, and should be more realistic. Even years later, those experiences still controlled her identity, until one day, she heard something that completely changed her perception. Your past explains who you were. It does not define who you can become. That was a shock. She realized she was allowing old experiences to determine the size of the life she could build. That was when she started doing something differently. Every time she needed to make a decision, she asked herself, "Is this a choice from the woman I used to be, or from the woman I am becoming?" That question changed everything. She began acting with more courage, positioning herself more firmly, and most importantly, stopped seeing herself through old limitations. This happens because your self-image directly influences your decisions. And while you continue living emotionally attached to the past, your reality will continue repeating old patterns. People who transform their lives understand something essential. They honor the past, but do not allow it to continue controlling their identity. Comment: I no longer live trapped by my old version. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that a new reality begins when you stop acting like the person who once had to survive and begin acting like the person who was born to evolve. Seventh principle: your reality changes when you stop seeking validation. There is a silent trap that weakens many people's self-image: the constant need for approval, needing others to agree, needing praise to feel enough, needing external validation to trust your own choices. A few years ago, a woman realized almost every important decision in her life passed through the same filter. What will people think? Before starting something new, she sought approval. Before changing direction, she wanted certainty that others would understand. And even when doing something for herself, she felt the need to explain it. Without realizing it, her identity was being built more by other people's opinions than by her own perception of herself. Until one day, she heard a phrase that completely changed the way she saw this. Whoever depends on external validation gives control of their identity to others. That stayed in her mind for days. She realized she was living trying to seem enough for the world, instead of internally building certainty about her own value. That was when she began changing small things. She stopped announcing every plan, stopped justifying every decision, and began making choices more aligned with herself, even when nobody fully understood them. At first, it was uncomfortable, because when you spend a long time depending on external approval, other people's silence feels like rejection. But over time, something started changing. Internal confidence increased. Her decisions became firmer, and the need to please everyone diminished. This happens because a powerful self-image is born from self-validation. People who transform their reality understand something essential. When you know who you are, you do not need the world to constantly confirm it. And that is exactly when your presence begins gaining strength. Comment: I do not depend on other people's validation. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that a strong identity is not built by trying to please the world. It is built by learning to trust yourself. 8th principle: start behaving like someone who deserves more. There is something that completely changes when a woman develops a strong self-image. She stops accepting a life beneath what she knows she deserves. This appears in small details, in the environments she frequents, the conversations she tolerates, the opportunities she accepts or refuses. A few years ago, a woman shared that she constantly felt frustrated, not because her life was terrible, but because deep down she knew she was living far below her potential. She accepted shallow relationships, accepted environments that drained her energy, and frequently minimized her own dreams to seem realistic, until one day she heard something that completely changed her perception. People rarely receive more than they believe they deserve. That echoed in her mind. She realized many of her choices were aligned with a limited self-image. Deep down, she still saw herself as someone who needed to accept the minimum to avoid losing opportunities. That was when she began changing the way she behaved. She started choosing environments more carefully, stopped insisting on misaligned relationships, and began acting like someone who genuinely believed in her own value. The most interesting part was what happened afterward. People started treating her differently. Opportunities changed, and even her physical posture seemed stronger. This happens because your self-image silently influences the standard of life you accept. When someone believes they deserve little, they tolerate almost anything. But when someone begins recognizing their own value, standards naturally rise. People who transform their reality understand something essential. Before receiving more from life, you need to begin seeing yourself as someone who deserves more. Comment: I behave like someone who deserves more. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that reality begins changing when you stop accepting less than your new identity can tolerate. 9th principle: protect your mind from the images that weaken who you are becoming. There is something few people realize about self-image. It is not built only by your thoughts. It is also built by the references you consume every single day, the people you follow, the content you watch, the conversations you repeatedly hear. All of these things create internal images about who you believe it is possible to become. A few years ago, a woman noticed something curious about her routine. She spent hours consuming content that, deep down, awakened comparison, insecurity, and feelings of inadequacy. It always seemed like someone else was more beautiful, more successful, further ahead in life. And without realizing it, her mind began absorbing a silent idea. I'm never enough. This started affecting her posture, her confidence, and even her decisions. Until one day she heard something that completely changed her perspective. Your mind becomes whatever it repeatedly observes. That made immediate sense. She realized she was feeding her mind daily with images that weakened her identity, instead of strengthening the woman she wanted to become. That was when she started filtering more carefully what she consumed. She reduced content that constantly triggered comparison, started following people who inspired real growth, and began exposing her mind to references more aligned with the life she wanted to build. The effect was silent, but profound. Insecurity decreased, clarity increased, and her self-image became much stronger. This happens because the mind absorbs patterns constantly. If you feed it comparison, scarcity, and negativity, your identity begins reflecting that. But when you choose references that strengthen the way you see yourself, your internal reality begins changing. People who transform their lives understand something essential. Protecting your mind also means carefully choosing which images are allowed to occupy space within it. Comment: I feed the image of the woman I am becoming. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that a powerful self-image is also built through what you choose to consume daily. 10th principle: your mind needs to see a future bigger than your present. There is a reason some people remain trapped in the same reality for years. They continue imagining the future through the limitations of the present. They think small because they are still emotionally connected to the old version of themselves. A few years ago, a woman shared something that seemed simple, but revealed a lot. Every time she thought about the future, she imagined only slightly improved versions of her current life. A little more money, a little more stability, a little more confidence. But she never allowed herself to imagine something truly great for herself. Deep down, there was a silent belief, maybe that's not meant for me. Until one day she heard a phrase that completely changed her perception. Your mind will never create a reality bigger than the one you believe is possible to live. That deeply affected her. She realized she was trying to build a new life, while still imagining the future through the limited identity of the past. That was when she began changing something important. She started visualizing a much greater version of herself, a more confident woman, more free, more disciplined, better positioned in life. And most importantly, she began acting daily like someone connected to that vision. At first, it felt distant, but something started happening. Her decisions changed, her posture changed, and her standards began rising. This happens because your mind constantly works to align your reality with the image you hold internally. If your vision is small, your choices will be small too. But when you expand the way you see yourself, you begin acting in ways compatible with that new identity. People who transform their reality understand something essential. Before living a greater life, you must first allow your mind to see it as possible. Comment: I allow myself to see a greater life for myself. This phrase represents the decision of someone who understands that reality begins changing when your mind finally accepts that you were born to live for more than just survival. Your reality does not change only when your circumstances change. It changes when your identity changes first. The way you see yourself silently influences everything. The standards you accept, the opportunities you believe you deserve, the environments you choose to enter, and even the courage you feel to take action. That is why creating a powerful self-image is not vanity. It is internal transformation. Because when you change the way you speak to yourself, the way you position yourself, and the way you choose to live, your mind begins working in favor of the woman you are building. And little by little, your reality begins following. Relationships change, choices change, opportunities change. Not because the world suddenly became different, but because you stopped acting like someone limited by the old version of yourself. In the end, the life you build will always be a reflection of the identity you choose to feed every day. And perhaps that is the most powerful transformation of all, when you finally understand that you do not need to wait for reality to change before believing in yourself. You believe first, and then reality begins responding.